present, to be still, to be quiet. We are grateful for this opportunity to come together, to share this time with like-minded individuals who've all come here with a common purpose, whether they they are here physically or via live stream. We've all come to heighten our awareness, to remember our source, to remember what's important. We are spiritual beings first and foremost, simply having a physical experience. There is a greater awareness at work, which each day we should strive a little bit more to come back in contact with. The ever-present, omniscient God. So it is. Amen. Well, we're going to continue on here, and we're going to kick off with our words of wisdom. They're subtle, but it says, God is too big for just one religion. Does anyone else agree with that? Is there something that feels good about that? No? One no in the back? Okay, well, hopefully we'll get there. Well, let's do a quick recap of what we did last week. So we began our talk series on this book. Is your God big enough, close enough, you enough? Jesus and the Three Faces of God. This is written by Paul Smith, who's a New Thought writer, but he's not specific to Unity, but he does do the Unity circuit. And during our initial look into this topic, we established that God cannot be described in words, and that God cannot be understood through words. Therefore, God cannot be understood with the intellect alone. That is not possible. We also looked at how the Christian idea of God began to change, began to morph in the 4th century from the concept of a male personification of God sitting up in the clouds into this new concept of a Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, 3 different forms of God that we could come in contact with or relate to. Now, this movement towards the Trinity was an expansion in human awareness. It was an expansion in our relationship to God. We went from this singular concept of God, and we got a little bit bigger. And now we are looking at taking the next step in our relationship to God, which starts in Paul's book with this question: is your God big enough? That's a question you could keep asking yourself as you progress down the spiritual path. But before we dive into that question, I would like to first address something that Paul Smith actually does address in his book, and I'm glad that he did, because it's a question that's often on many people's minds, which might be the very question that some of you have had on your mind in this series. But in order to get to that question, I first have to take a roundabout way to lead us there. So I want to ask you this. Raise your hand if you were raised in some sort of Bible-based religion as a child, whether that's Catholic or Christian or Baptist or Presbyterian. Okay, so that's just about every one of us. Now, raise your hand if you knew someone as a child that was raised in a Baptist or Catholic or some sort of Bible-based religion growing up. Okay, so that's all of us. So we all have some sort of contact in our youth to this. Not you, not at all. Old Testament? Nothing? Torah? No? Okay. Everyone but Baruch. Okay, it's okay though. You always stand out as something special everywhere you go, so that's fine. I'm perfectly okay with that. All right, so we sort of all have this relationship to that, and most of us in this country, if we were raised in this country, couldn't have avoided having a relationship to that in some way or another in our upbringing, whether directly or through friends and relatives. Now this brings us around to the question I want to address, the question that some of you may have had on your mind when faced with the past. Why in Unity do we still talk about the Bible and use Christian terminology? Well, on March 24th of this year, I gave a talk that was addressing that specific topic in detail. So I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. If you're interested in hearing that, you can go back to that talk. So instead of doing that again, I feel that the answer Paul Smith gives in his book, because he does address this question, not specific to Unity, but to his topic, I think he does a good job of it. And this is what he says. We Westerners often have another problem with our spiritual path. Many of us began our spiritual journey in a traditional version of the Christian religion. Coming into a more modern or progressive way of viewing the world often brings a challenge to our traditional religion. So as we mature, as we grew, a lot of us sort of might have accepted our religion when we were very young, but then as we grew up, we might have started to question it as we were exposed to more concepts in the world and as we began to mature. And the vast majority of people that find Unity, like this church center, are in that position. At some point in their life, they were raised by a strict Bible concept, or they're around people that were, and then it became less and less relevant to them. And as they mature, they understood it less, and then they looked for something else, or they just left altogether. And then eventually they find Unity, and that's where you can find and sort of relate to most people in Unity, is that's their journey. They were raised in this strict religion, they went out into the world, and then they looked for something else. But the issue is that they may not have made peace with the religion of their upbringing or the faith of their upbringing. They may not have healed from that experience, whether they knew they had healing to do or not. So in his book, he quotes Judith Miller. He says, Judith Miller, professor of developmental psychology at Columbia University, in her insightful book, Healing the Western Soul, A Spiritual Homecoming for Today's Seekers, it's a nice long title, gets to the point, has found that many Westerners have lost their traditional spiritual anchors. They're now searching to find them in other religions, spiritual paths, or their own mixture of various beliefs and practices. This doesn't just sound like people in Unity, it kind of just sounds like the catch-all for people in Boulder, doesn't it? This pretty much explains people in Boulder. Well, it goes on. She found that healing comes when people reclaim and transform their original traditional anchors. She says that our healing must take place in the tradition we were first at home in, not in later ones we have found useful, but that lack the power to evoke profound spiritual experiences and articulate deep understanding. So look at this concept. We're very impressionable when we're young. There's a lot of things that are built into us and that we sort of just take on as a part of our being when we're young. And if we haven't addressed that as we become older, we can't just run from that. And there's a lot of power in that if we can turn that towards something that makes more sense or something that feels more right to us instead of just trying to throw it out, because that impressionable stage is a very important part of our lives. So we had this relationship with a Bible-based religion growing up, and this is really indicative of any relationship. If we just walk away without healing and without growing from that relationship, we're going to just drag all those same issues into the next relationship. And so that's pretty much how it is with religions, is we just sort of run from it, we don't learn from it and grow from it, we're going to drag this baggage into the next situation we go into. So that's something just to keep in mind as we move forward. So this is what he says, this is Paul now speaking. I use specifically Christian terminology to explain my understanding of Christianity. I'm also clear that other traditions can be authentic spiritual paths. My using Christian naming and categories affirms the use of each tradition's terminology in describing its own path. For me to stop using Christian terminology subtly implies that Buddhists and others should not use their unique terminology either. I really thought that was an interesting perspective, because a lot of people are quick to say, you know, Christian terminology is outdated, there's so much baggage attached to it, why are we going to use that whatsoever? And he's saying, you know what? All of these words have issues with them. No one is clean in their history. Everything's had its past. But we can't just say we throw out one, we throw out this one, we throw out that one. It's time to evolve all of them. It's time for us to raise up all of this stuff and not try to just distance ourselves from it, but say, let's heal this history and grow with it. So no religion can perfectly describe God. We've already established that because it has to use the imperfect medium of words. And words just cannot describe God. So as our concept of God starts to evolve, we have to evolve our words in relationship to God. And that is part of what this series is all about. How do we evolve these words in our relationship to God? So back to the question for today, is your God big enough? Of course, to answer this question can be difficult. One, because you're going to have to use words, so that makes it difficult right off the bat. But this question probably actually raises another question. If you're a person who likes to ask questions, there's more questions. Why does it matter how big your God is? Well, let's talk about that by way of an example. Does anyone remember this? Well, you probably don't remember it, but I hope no one's that old in here. Anyone here that actually was there? No, okay. We all learned about the Crusades growing up. The Crusades were based on a very small concept of God. A God that was so small in insight and understanding that it actually picked sides in human disputes. That's a pretty small God. So small that this concept of God they had played favorites among its believers. So small that this concept of God was the only God for a select few people on the planet, not really the God of everyone. So incredibly small, in fact, that it believed and advocated in war, killing, and torture. This is a concept of God that is so small, it stands lower than your average human with a basic sense of morality, right? That's a pretty small God. A pretty small God. So a small God can be a very dangerous God. Believing in a small God creates small thinking, small understanding, small empathy, small compassion, small humanity in general. And the bigger the God we have, the more expanded our awareness becomes, and the healthier we become as a culture, as a society, and as individuals. The bigger God we get, the more healthy this experience will be. So Paul Smith leaves us with some questions for us to ponder when we're trying to figure out how big is our God. The first, he states, you know your God is big enough if your God at least encompasses what we know about the universe today. Wow. Now this is an interesting notion because it is something that is normally frowned upon in religion. Science and religion are supposed to be at odds, right? We've pretty much heard that for decades. Science and religion are supposed to be at odds, and if they're not supposed to be, they've definitely chosen to be. But if God is infinite, which we've established God must be infinite, if God is in and through all things and all possibilities that are out there, then science can only prove and further vindicate the existence and majesty and power of this divine intelligence. If we believe that to be true about God, then science can only prove and vindicate that. So religion shouldn't have anything to fear if you really think about it. In fact, religion should be excited about what science is discovering about God and its relationship to our physical experience. Remember, science is only discovering about God and the relationship to our physical experience. Science does not have the tools to go beyond that, at least that we know of yet. So, as Carl Sagan, astronomer and cosmologist Carl Sagan said, and this is from Paul's book, how is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded, this is better than we thought. The universe is much bigger than our prophets said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. God must be even greater than we dreamed. A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly tapped by the conventional faiths. Sooner or later, such a religion will emerge. Well, that religion not only is here, but it's been here since the late 1800s, and it's called Unity. Here we are. Our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, saw science and religion as intertwined. They never saw them at odds. So much so that I want to show you how they defined the term Christianity. Christianity, the science of eternal life. It is governed by scientific principles of mind action, which are really the foundation of all the various sciences. The word science is used 3 times in describing Christianity. But really, relating science to religion started thousands of years ago. It didn't start with the Fillmores, and it started all over the world, from the Mayans and the Incas to the Egyptians and the Rishis in India to the Jewish scholars way back in the day. Native cultures around the world were using science as a part of religion. You think of the Mayan calendar. Science and the process of testing and proving a theory or practice was just a part of what they did. At that time, they weren't seen as, oh, science is over here, religion's over here. It was just, this is what we do. This is a part of the process. We unfold God through our own discoveries. Yogananda said, this is the guru Yogananda, by the definite science of meditation known for millenniums to the yogis and sages of India and to Jesus, any seeker of God can enlarge the caliber of his consciousness to omniscience to receive within himself the universal intelligence of God. Yogananda speaks a lot about meditation is a scientific process. It's not just something we throw out there and we hope that something happens, and maybe something happened, maybe it won't because there's a magical fairy involved and we don't know how it works. Saying it's a very scientific process. You sit down, you do the practice, you do it in repetition, and you will see the results that have been told to you. But you have to follow the practice. You can't get the same results of a test if you do it different every time you sit down to do that test. You've got to follow it. You've got to be consistent to get those results. So, going back to the statement of number 1 from Paul Smith, what do we know about the universe today? Is everyone familiar with the Big Bang? Did everybody know it's just a theory? Okay, good. We knew it's a thing. Because you're probably going to have to let the familiarity with that theory go. The Big Bang never happened. New research suggests. We're going to have to rewrite some books. It might be the most accepted theory of the beginning of the universe, but new research suggests the Big Bang may have never happened. In a paper titled Bouncing Cosmology Inspired by Regular Black Holes, physicist Juliano Cesar Silva Neves challenges the concept that time ever had a beginning point and that the expanding universe we live in today was preceded by a contraction. I believe the Big Bang never happened, Neves was quoted by phys.org. His work seeks to prove that there was no explosion. Instead, he believes that there was a repeating, growing, shrinking cycle thought of as bouncing cosmology. Whoever Neves expresses that simply by removing the concept of a Big Bang incident, the universe would sensibly be a thing of eternal expansion and collapse. Eternal expansion and collapse. To go from a very small and finite Big Bang source to an eternal expansion and collapse is God getting bigger, right? It breaks our limited perception of time as if it had a beginning. We would love to think that time had some sort of beginning. It puts God and the universe, God as the universe, beyond any limited construct of time. This has to throw out time altogether as we understand it. You see, it is very easy for us humans to try and say that this is the thing, to try to point at one specific thing and say, ah, there it is, that's where it started. That's in our nature. We like to see a finite conclusion. There it is, right there, Big Bang, 1 point, boom, everything came from that one spot. It puts our simple mind at ease. It helps us rationalize things because it's finite and it's conclusive. It's to the point. But now we are being forced to expand the mind once again, to see that there is no one thing that started the universe. It was all things at all time, all the time. That's kind of hard for us to wrap our head around. We don't like that. We like this Big Bang concept, right? There's a pack of gum in the universe that exploded, and all of a sudden we're all here. But God was always in and through all things, and will always be in and through all things. We're going to share a song with you now, and I'm actually going to play the drums. That's how desperate we've become.
All right, here we go.
Sometimes I forget where I come from. Sometimes I forget where I'm going to. Sometimes I get so confused I lose my way. Sometimes I know you feel the same. Then I remember there is nowhere that God is not. No, no, no. There is nowhere God is not. There is nowhere that God is not. No, no, no. 'Cause everywhere I am, I know what I got. Sometimes I believe in what I see. Sometimes I believe what I perceive. Sometimes I get so confused I lose my way. Sometimes I don't know what to say. Then I remember there is nowhere that God is not. No, no, no. There is nowhere God is not. There is nowhere that God is not. No. Everywhere I am, I know what I've got. I forgot to pray, forgot to be still and know. Forgot to forgive myself until I forget myself. Forgot to ask for help, I forgot to say a word. Forgot to believe in me, believe in my spirit world. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Then I remember there is nowhere that God is not. No, no. There is nowhere that God is not. There is nowhere that God is not. No, no, no. 'Cause everywhere I am, I know what I've got. There is nowhere that God is not. No, no, no. 'Cause everywhere I am, I know what I've got. Everywhere I am, I know what I've got. Everywhere I am, I know what I've got.
Go Shad.
That was fun, right? We're allowed to have fun once in a while, aren't we? Good. Okay. That is good. All right. Well, apparently, new study says octopus eggs came to Earth on a comet from space. So octopi could be aliens, as it turns out. So men are from Mars, women are from Venus, octopi are from Jupiter, I suppose. Why not? So none of us really are native here. None of us really belong here. We all just sort of crashed into this place, and here we are. So that's an interesting factoid. But haven't you always looked at octopi and said, there's no way that thing came from the same place we came from? Just doesn't make any sense. I mean, ultimately, we're all one, but surely this planet. Okay. It's a real study. Let's continue along in Paul Smith's analysis with questions to ponder. So this is number 2. You know your God is big enough if you can't wrap your mind around that God, but you can wrap your life around that God. We have established that we cannot comprehend God with the intellect alone. The mind is literally incapable of understanding infinity while still existing in such a finite, dualistic form, in the physical form. It's just not possible. So here's an example of infinity that I would like to share that got my mind really spinning when I heard it. So in many ways, and this was shared with me by a physics professor, this concept. So here's what he said. In many ways, it's looking like there are an infinite amount of planets out there that have been around for an infinite amount of time. All of them in various stages of development, just like our own planet Earth. And that being the case, there has to be at least one planet out there exactly like Earth. Not just the planet's characteristics being exactly like Earth, but everything on the planet at any point in time, which means somewhere in the vast multiverse of infinity, there is an exact duplicate of me giving this exact talk to all of you in a world that is exactly like ours is right now. Think about that. If there's an infinite amount of planets with infinite amount of time and infinite amount of variables, right now there's a version of me standing on some planet out there doing exactly this talk to all of you in exactly this fashion. Try to wrap your head around that. In fact, there could be many of them doing exactly what we're doing right now. In fact, there could be an infinite amount of versions of me and you in this situation right now. That get your head spinning a little bit? You're thinking, but I'm a unique individual. There could be no duplicate of me. I came through protoplasm in a special way, and I'm the only one in the universe. Anyway, so lots of us out there as a possibility. That's what infinity does to us. It's really hard for us to comprehend what infinity really means. Our minds are not going to be able to wrap themselves around that. This concept of the infinite is just too big for this little brain. But can you wrap your life around it? That is what Paul is proposing. Can you start feeling it before you can see it or rationalize it? Can you start living as if it is so, regardless of what your 5 senses are telling you is so? Can you accept all things are God, even in the face of things that appear to be so contrary to God? That's a difficult one for us in this day and age, to accept that all things are God, even though there are things that appear to be so contrary to God. Can you drop into the sense of deep humility faced with the possibility of such an unimaginable vastness and greatness of God? And I think humility is the key word, and that's what, I can't remember his name. We'll let that go. Carl Sagan. That's what he was referring to. If religion could recognize how big we're discovering that God is, it would bring a sense of humility to us. We spent far too long thinking the earth was the center of all things, and humanity was so special in some way. And now we're seeing, wow, there could be not only other life forms out there, there could be duplicates of us out there. That should bring a deep sense of humility, not in shame, but in awe of how amazing this omnipresence truly is. Which brings us to number 3. You know your God is big enough if you think it is reasonable to believe in that God enough for your heart to love that God. The heart cannot embrace what the mind rejects. This is a very powerful point. Now we are starting to touch on the powers of faith and imagination, which are 2 of our body's 12 power centers as recognized by the Fillmores and Unity. Your heart will follow your belief. But if your belief is based on intellect alone, then your heart will be limited by what the intellect can comprehend. You seeing the issue here? And God cannot be comprehended by the intellect. We've already established that. So we've already put a limitation between our mind and our heart. Our heart's going to have a very hard time feeling this presence of God if it's based on what the mind can prove, because the mind can't prove God with the intellect. So for us to engage in the heart in this process, in this experience, we need faith in an understanding deeper than the intellect. If we're only experiencing the intellect, we at least have to have faith that there is an understanding deeper than the intellect at work that could reveal this to our heart. We need to begin by, believe it or not, imagining the feeling of the presence of God even before we personally experience the presence of God. Have you ever heard of fake it till you make it? Yes. Have you ever heard of faith it till you make it? That was actually a term we were taught in ministerial school. They'd say, you have to faith it till you make it. If you're not feeling it yet, start pretending like you're feeling it. Because the heart doesn't necessarily know the difference between what you're pretending and what's actually true. And you can start engaging the heart in the process before the mind is actually on board. Skip ahead in line a little bit there. So the heart is like an antenna for God's love. All right? But the mind is what tunes the frequency for the heart. So it's this antenna, it's this passive antenna. It'll receive whatever you send to it. But the mind is tuning to the frequency that's going to be sent to this heart. And what the mind is tuned into is the frequency that the heart receives. Tune your mind to the frequency of the love of God through faith and imagination. If you're not experiencing it, it's going to require faith. It's going to require some imagination to tune into that frequency so that the heart can receive and open to that frequency. So the fourth statement, you know your God is big enough if that God is as big as the God Jesus knew and talked about. We will talk more about this next week when we get into, is your God close enough? So I'm not going to go into this into detail now. So I want to get on to 5. You know your God is big enough if your imagination soars to new levels when reflecting about God in the healing and further evolution of this world. If you're not inspired, uplifted, and empowered, and motivated, and driven, and energized, and excited, and called to something higher and greater each day, that might be a sign that your God is too small. Evolution didn't stop with the arrival of human beings on this planet. It is a never-ending process for all of us as a humanity and for each of us as an individual. From moment to moment, day to day, relationship to relationship, from one experience to the next, from one lifetime to the next, if you believe in reincarnation, we are working towards what some are calling the transition from Homo sapien to Homo spiritus. The next evolution in humanity, the spiritual evolution. We've spent these billions of years going through a physical evolution, and now we're sitting at the precipice of a spiritual evolution. No longer so fixated on the body and what the body and the mind are doing, but moving beyond that, not leaving it, but taking it to a new elevated, higher experience. The spiritualized and awakened version of what we are today. And it will take all of us starting to relate to a very big God. We're going to have to relate to a very big God in order to make this happen. And we are making that happen, I believe. And that is the truth as I experience it. So we're going to take some time for meditation, which we call the silence. I invite you to get yourself in a comfortable position, to quiet the mind, to quiet the body, to quiet the heart, to quiet the lungs, to allow yourself to slow down. name of God is actually the sound of a breath. And that when we slow down enough to become aware of the breath, the experience of the inhale, the moment of pausing before the experience of the exhale, followed by another moment of pausing, so that we never rush from one process to the next, but we always take time for reflection in between. This is the way of God. The expansion, the contraction. And now today our science is discovering that the entire universe is breathing. Breathing in and out over billions and billions of years. We are just simply particles as a part of the divine breath, growing and expanding all together, without end, without distance, without time. Each of us being called to slow down, release the worries, the thoughts, the frustrations, and to reconnect with the breath of the body, and the breath of the universe that is breathing us, and recognizing that they are one and the same. And so we breathe. It's good to just breathe. And so it is. So this is the part of the service where we like to spotlight different things around the community that we find important. And so far we started with things that are happening here in this church. And today we have Steve Hayes, who's going to come up and share a little bit with us about conscious communications, which I thought about because we were at a festival this week on Wednesday up at the CU campus, and watching Steve's natural ability to just walk around and talk to people was very impressive. So he's going to talk to you about conscious communications.
Good evening. It is my privilege to run our conscious communication practice group, which is based on Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication work. And I love this work. It's important for me, and I think the reason you would enjoy it is it's really about bringing peace into your life and into the world, and learning to speak not just from our heads, but from our hearts. Case in point, recently I had to tell my boss at work that our business plan was gonna fail. And if I came from my head and just said, yeah, this plan's gonna fail, it's got mistakes, we need to stop, that could all have been true. But instead of speaking just from that spot, I dropped into my heart and connected to what my values were. And I said, you know, I really value our end users, and I know how much time we've put in this project, and I want it to be a success. And so to honor our users, I'd really appreciate it if we would consider some alternatives. She said yes, we flipped that program around. I think that conversation was successful because I wasn't speaking about judgment, what was wrong and right. I was speaking from the heart. So this group is about learning to speak with more compassion and empathy. This group is about empowering your communication in all parts of your lives. And it's unique because it's not a class, it's a drop-in group, no experience required, it's with real-life examples, on-hands exercises. So it's every second and fourth Thursday of the month from 7 to 9 p.m. And if you can't make it, there's another planet nearby that's also having the group, because there's multiple planets having this group, right?
Yes, exactly. Right. Many
Anyway,
opportunities.
if you have questions about the group, come talk to me after the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And that's a really important work because if you've noticed, it's becoming more difficult to talk to people because we become so divided in our beliefs. So to be able to have conversations without flaring up our differences is really a valuable practice. And we do have many ongoing groups going out throughout the week, so I invite you to check out our calendar, physical calendar, or our website calendar, just to stay current on what's happening throughout the week. All right, thank you.
I keep fighting voices in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells
good Saturday.
Thank you, guys. That was awesome. Well, you're not going to want to mix next Saturday. I'll be playing the tuba and the piccolo flute and the kazoo and tambourine, so I got to learn those this week. It's a very big time. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come out and be with us. This is a powerful experience, and I feel the energy in the room, and I appreciate you guys being here.